I have to be honest with you, even though the Kansas City Chiefs technically ended up with the number one pick in the 2013 NFL draft, for my money, the worst team in the NFL last year and the worst organization in all of the NFL to me easily were the Jacksonville Jaguars. Easily. They themselves finished 2-14 in way butt naked last in the AFC South. They've got the second pick in this 2013 NFL draft. It shouldn't be a surprise that finally, GM Gene Smith was fired. I don't know what took so damn long, but it finally happened. And head coach Mike Mularkey was fired after, what, one season? Woo! The new owner, Khan, he ain't putting up with this crap. He wants something done, or he's probably going to move the damn team. Who knows? Well, when you look at the way the season broke down for the Jaguars in 2012, they sucked on the offensive side of the ball primarily, minus a few weeks where the offense looked okay. In general, their offense sucked, and their defense sucked too. Offensively, they finished 29th in the league in total yards, 30th overall in points per game, and 30th in rushing yards. When you look at the defensive side of the ball, they finished 29th in points allowed, 30th in total yards allowed, 30th versus the run, and 32nd, dead last in sacks. Think about that, dead last. You look at all those categories, both on the offensive and the defensive side of the ball, it shouldn't be any surprise that the Jaguars finished 2-14. They suck, and all of those categories in the record validate their level of suck. As far as any positives from the 2012 season for the Jaguars, really weren't a lot. Perhaps the biggest ones that stand out to me would be the promise that was shown by both first-round pick Justin Blackmon and then, of course, Cecil Shorts as well. It looks like they potentially, in Jacksonville, have a nice 1-2 tandem at wide receiver. Some of the negatives, first and foremost, it's Blaine Gabbert. He sucks. Period. Anybody that doubts that now, I wonder what the hell you're smoking. He sucks. And when they brought in Chad Henne, he wasn't that much better ultimately. He had a couple of games where he played all right, and then he showed that he's nothing more than an NFL backup himself. And not to mention the fact that MJD didn't play most of the year, and when he did, he was only effective. You're getting to the point now where you have to wonder if the Jacksonville Jaguars are ultimately going to move on from the Maurice Jones-Drew era. This is an organization that's in drastic need of a facelift, in drastic need of a talent infusion, in drastic need of something to invigorate the team, the organization, and that city's fan base. It's something you'll hear me talk about all throughout these team-by-team recaps when explaining why a team sucks or why a team is on the path to getting better or they are a contending team. It all comes down in a lot of ways to the NFL draft. And when you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars draft history over the past 5 years, their grade to me is nothing short of an F. 2008 was a total loss. They traded up from the 20s to get into the top 10 to take Derek Harvey, and he was a bust. And in the second round took Quentin Moses. He's been a bust. This was a recurring theme for years. The Jacksonville Jaguars have been trying to address the pass rush, or their team's lack of pass rush, I should say, in the draft, and they continually poorly evaluate the defensive line position, and as a result, still going into the 2013 NFL draft, find themselves looking for primarily a pass rusher. It's horrible. Derek Harvey, Quentin Moses, 2009, out of the 5 drafts, 2009 was arguably the best draft of their 5, and that was nothing to write home about either. The best player out of that draft was a first-round pick, Eugene Monroe. It's a solid tackle, but I don't think anybody would classify him as spectacular. 2010 to me was a watershed moment. You had the chance, you could say whatever you want about this player, I grant you, but they were sitting there at pick 10. And they took a guy in Tyson Alualu, who was projected as a late first to mid-second round talent, which is pretty much what he's played like, more like the mid to late second round talent that he kind of was coming out of Cal. They had the chance to take Tim Tebow. And like I said, you could say whatever you want about Tebow, but the fact is, what's the difference between if they would have just taken Tebow in 2010, then they come around and what you knew was probably going to be Del Rio's lame duck last year, they trade up to pick 10 to take Blaine Gabbert from Missouri, a clear case of a system quarterback who was gun-shy and afraid of a pass rush and just didn't have what it takes to be an NFL starting quarterback. What was the difference? Maybe with Tebow, you at least generate some interest in the local area. And I say, why was the Alualu pick so bad? Because they've spent over the past, and I emphasize this again, over the past 5 drafts, they've taken 6 defensive linemen in the first 3 rounds, and they still suck on the defensive line. The days of Henderson and Stroud manning the defensive tackle position are long gone. They're still looking to address their damn pass rush. After all the picks they've invested on the defensive line over the past 5 drafts, holy hell. At least in 2011, they got Cecil Shorts in the 4th round. He was good value. And then this 2012 draft class, this past draft class, you have guys like Blackman in there. But then they took a punter in the 3rd round. When you were a team coming off, what, a 5-11 season? You felt it was so important to take a punter in the 3rd round? When you still had an issue of, pass rush. Oh, that's right, they took another pass rusher, Andre Branch, in the 2nd round, who had as many sacks, 1, as their 6th-round cornerback, Mike Smith, did out of Florida State, with 1, who was, you would argue, maybe their 2nd-best draft pick this past year. God, it's clearly apparent why the Jaguars suck. It's all about the draft, or in this organization's case, their utter and complete total failures to draft effectively over the past 5 years on both the offensive and especially on the defensive side of the football. So as I mentioned earlier, both head coach Mike Mularkey and general manager Gene Smith were justifiably shown the door, even though Mularkey does get a little bit of the hose because he became ultimately a fall man for Gene Smith's inadequacies as the general manager. You've got a new head coach, former Seattle Seahawks defensive coordinator Gus Bradley, who did some very good things with his time under Pete Carroll with that Seahawks defense, and a new general manager, David Caldwell. You look at the draft board and the draft needs of the Jacksonville Jaguars. This team sucks, period. The talent cupboard is not very full. It's pretty close to bare. So you could sit there and say, well, yes, you're going to hear a lot of talk about the defense, and you're going to hear a lot of talk about needing a pass rush. How many freaking times do you have to draft a pass rusher, before you say, maybe we're barking up the wrong tree here? This could be an example of a Jaguars team that desperately just needs to stick to a best player available mantra, because basically anybody they take at any position could be an instant and significant upgrade over the talent on their current roster. I could see a situation where the Jacksonville Jaguars maybe don't fall in love with anybody with that number 2 overall selection. A really bad year. Even when they suck, they don't suck bad enough to get the number 1 pick. And they get the number 2 pick in a year where the quarterback class has a lot of question marks to it. So it's not like there's quarterback, or the logical 1-2 picks like last year with Luck and Griffin. It's a bad year for the Jacksonville Jaguars to end up with the number 2 overall pick. I would assume that they would desperately be trying to dump out of this pick to try and compile picks as much as possible. Now, part of that is obviously you got to find a willing dance partner, and I'm not sure they're going to be able to find a willing dance partner for somebody to want to trade up, for a defensive tackle or end or an offensive tackle like Jokel from Texas A&M. I'm not buying that. Now, you would think also, too, with a new coach and a new general manager, that you would want to install a new quarterback and one that you got through the draft. You would think so. But for some reason, especially because they did just draft Blaine Gabbert 2 years ago, I don't think they're going to go right back to the draft for the quarterback in the 1st round anyways. It might be a situation where they may try to address that in the 2nd or 3rd round, and or maybe try to trade for somebody that Gus Bradley's familiar with, Matt Flynn from Seattle, who's backing up Russell Wilson. Maybe he'd want to bring in Matt Flynn and give him a chance to become the starter. I'm not saying I fully agree with that strategy, but that may very, very well be the strategy that they employ. Again, when I look at this team, you look at the AFC South, you've got the Indianapolis Colts, who are going to have an explosive offense for many years probably. The Houston Texans are a team that can put points on the board. I think the Titans are going to try to build themselves as an offense that can move the ball down the field and score points. So when you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, how should they try and build their team? What would be potentially the best way for them to compete in the quickest fashion, in the best fashion in the AFC South? It may very well be to be that counterculture to everybody else in their division and become a defense and pound the ball physical type of team. The type of team on defense, they have a dominant defense where you're stout against the run and you do generate a great pass rush. And on the offensive side of the ball, you have a power running attack similar to what Seattle had and that Gus Bradley is very familiar with. That's something that I could see. I look at the Jaguars, and if they do stay put at pick number 2, I could see them potentially taking the Werner kid, from Florida State, maybe DeMonte Moore from Texas A&M, perhaps Star Latulele, I believe I got his name right. I may have butchered it, the defensive tackle from Utah, because if Gus Bradley's coming from that Seattle Seahawks system and he worked up close and personal with Red Bryant, he may look at Latulele as a Red Bryant type of versatile defensive lineman that he can line up both at end and at tackle. I think the Jaguars may be looking to move on from the Maurice Jones-Drew era too, so I would not rule it out of the realm of possibility that they would look to trade back up into the later portion of the first round. You may say to get a quarterback, and that might possibly be the case, but I would say if they try to address that quarterback need maybe via free agency and or trade or with another pick later on in the draft, that they might try to trade up back into the end portion of the first round to take somebody like Eddie Lacy from Alabama, who made himself a ton of money in that national championship game against Notre Dame, probably clearly establishing himself as the #1 running back in this 2013 NFL draft class and probably the only first-round running back. So if you look at it, if you're a Jaguars fan, and I don't know how many there are, but you look at getting an upgrade on your defensive line potentially, you look at maybe trading back up into the last portion of the first round to get a guy like Eddie Lacy, that could be a good start to trying to establish a new Jacksonville Jaguars organizational identity, both on the defensive and offensive side of the football. In terms of any other players they could take, you never know. They may take a best player available approach and take Luke Jokel, the tackle from Texas A&M. It's possible. I don't think it's a smart move, but it's possible. And you know what? If both Geno Smith and Mike Glennon or Tyler Wilson or whoever, two of those quarterbacks really, really impress in all the offseason stuff to the point where in this kind of weakish draft, you could justify taking a quarterback #1 and #2 overall, the Jacksonville Jaguars might say, you know what, once and for all, we need to move on from this Blaine Gabbert mistake. We need an identity. The best way to have an identity as an organization ultimately is to have a franchise quarterback, and we think this guy, whoever it may be, might very well be that guy. So the Jacksonville Jaguars is kind of hard for me to figure out. They could go in a lot of different directions. You could say the boring way is just to draft the best available pass rusher at #2 overall. But again, like I said, I hedge on that a little bit just because they've spent so many draft picks in recent years on the pass rush, and it's failed for them so miserably. But with Gus Bradley coming in, I would look for him to try and build this defense very much in the image of what he was around with Pete Carroll in Seattle and establish an offense, that Jaguar fans are somewhat familiar with MJD for several years there, with a power running ball control type of offense. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Jacksonville. Do I hold incredibly high hopes for them? No. I think personally that this is the job that Lovie Smith should have gotten. I don't know if Lovie's maybe waiting for another job next year, Dallas Cowboys. But I was stunned when Lovie wasn't hired for this job and Gus Bradley was, and I was surprised then at that point that they didn't just wait for somebody like Greg Roman. But we'll see what happens.